11 honors, and we're starting to talk about Emily Dickinson. Well, actually, Walt Whitman today, but there's a picture of Walt Whitman and Emily Dickinson, two Civil War era poets, just like Mark Twain was a Civil War era writer. Both of these were born before the Civil War, lived through it. They're quite different, male, female. They're very different, but they are considered two of the greatest poets we've ever produced. And we're just going to look at the one on the right, a little fuzzy, but that's also a picture, a typical picture you get of Walt Whitman. Have you ever heard of him before? Okay, good. At least you've heard the name. You know, we looked at the picture of Mark Twain, which was an image he cultivated, the vanilla suit, the mustache, the white hair, possibly a cigar or something like that. Looked like the country gentleman. Well, this was a picture that I understand that Walt Whitman kind of cultivated. He was a famous poet in his day. He lived a long life. Emily Dickinson was an obscure poet, almost unknown, and when we get to her, they now are side by side in terms, I think, of their importance. They were poets living in the 19th century, but they were writing poems that would be admired in the 20th century. They helped shape poetry in the next generation. Well known and almost totally unknown. So we'll do a little bit with Walt Whitman here, and look at a couple of his poems. Question on Whitman. I'd like you to know these. You know, when we do have the test, these are the things you need to know. When and where was he born? I'll tell you that in a minute. Most of the presidents of the United States, until about Lincoln, I don't know if anybody, he was born in Kentucky, lived in Illinois, but most of the presidents up to that point were New Englanders or Virginians. Madison, I probably was Virginian. Jefferson was Virginia. Washington was Virginia. Adams was a Northerner, I believe. Of course, Jackson, he was a Southerner. He was Tennessee. But it seems like most of the culture in America came out of the northeast, as well as the writers. So that, you know, Whitman and Dickinson did, but Hawthorne did, Melville did. Those are two that you've read this year. So most of the culture, the politics, the power in the country was in the Northeast. Whitman was, we'll find out where he was born, but he was one of those great ones. I always like to connect the life of somebody with what they do. Sometimes somebody will ask you, maybe a grandchild will ask you, Granddad, why did you become whatever you're going to become? You don't have any idea as of right now. Maybe you do have an idea, but maybe a desire. But they'll ask you, how did you get into this job? And you'll have a story. So I like to know how people got into what they do, and particularly being a teacher, I'm interested in how writers became writers. He wrote a book called Leaves of Grass. It was incredibly significant. He only wrote one book in his life, Leaves of Grass, but he published it 7 times. So he would add to it every time. It got larger and larger and larger. The first edition was rather thin. The 7th edition was really long. So he would keep adding to it under the name Leaves of Grass. And you'll need to know what characterizes his poetry. So here's his background. 1819 died 1892. Do the math real fast. 71 years, 73 years old. That's pretty old. His father knew Thomas Paine, the pamphleteer, the patriot. Common Sense, I believe, is the name of one of his famous pamphlets, revolutionary. They moved from Long Island to Brooklyn. Now, I don't know really the geography of New York City, but I know I can picture Long Island, and then Brooklyn is, you know, in or right there is a part of the city. So they're all close together. So he was a New Yorker. At 11, he left school, worked in a printing office, and started to write a little bit. I think his brother, I'm not sure about this, but I think his brother was I might be getting him confused with Ben Franklin. I know Ben Franklin's brother was a printer. I don't know if Whitman's was, but it seemed like there was. So notice he left school when he was 11. He didn't get a large formal education. And yet now he's studied and by people who teach formal education, doctor, PhDs. It's interesting that he's smarter. Genius, in a way, genius doesn't need school. Genius needs a little push and some help, and then genius can learn on its own. Shakespeare, genius. You don't have to have a lot of degrees. You don't have to have a lot of formal education. If you're a genius, you don't teach yourself, but you're capable of learning yourself. So I'd consider him probably a literary genius. He was fascinated by romantic novels, even wrote one, but that's not what we associate him with. He especially liked Sir Walter Scott, who wrote Ivanhoe. We used to read that here. By age 15, he's on his own. So that means he was making a living for himself, living on his own. I don't know much more about his family background. Look at kind of the jobs he had. Journalist, teacher, clerk, carpenter. He's kind of most famous for working as a nurse, not a doctor, but a nurse in Civil War hospitals in and around Washington. That's where all the battles except for Gettysburg took place, or maybe Antietam, but they took place south of Washington, D.C. That's where the South started. It took place in the South. And so a lot of those wounded would travel north to Washington. And his brother was wounded in the war. And so he started that way because he had a brother. So he is considered a Civil War poet. But he reminds me of Thoreau, who did a lot of different jobs. Considering he was one of the great names in American history and literature, it's interesting his jobs were pretty just ordinary jobs. You don't see ambassador, you don't see senator, you don't see college professor. These are just regular jobs that regular people do. And yet, in a lot of ways, he wasn't a regular person at all. He's extraordinary. That's one of his monikers, one of his names, epithets, the poet of democracy. He was a self-aggrandizer. That sounds bad. To aggrandize means to puff up yourself. He was, in a sense, very egocentric. He had a reason for that. So he kind of self-marketed himself. He would call himself the poet of democracy, the poet of America. This was also interesting. This quote right here was the statement that Ralph Waldo Emerson made when he published his first edition, 1855. That's at the end of those 5 or 6 years where these great books are published. Leaves of Grass was near the end of that. And so he sent a copy to the most famous literary person in America at the time, I guess, was Ralph Waldo Emerson. And he wrote this statement back to him, wrote him a letter and said, I greet you at the beginning of a great career. It sounds understatement, doesn't it? Because it was a spectacular career, really. But Emerson recognized his greatness. Writers, I don't know. Writers are as different as there are people. But many saw him as a lazy, unambitious person, kind of like they did Thoreau. What kind of work are you doing? Can you provide for a family? They said that about Thoreau. Because they would see him not working, but walking and observing. Just kind of, I can imagine him leaning against something in a square and just watching. If you're going to be a writer, you have to know human nature. You have to know human beings. So that's where this comes from. His ability to know people came from his watching people. So what some people consider lazy, writers can write in the morning. You don't see writers writing. And they can't write all the time. I've tried a little bit of that on my own recently, and I get really tired after just 20, 30 minutes of writing. I'm sitting at a computer and hacking away at it. I get tired. I can't. I've heard most writers. It'd be typical, say, to write 2 or 3 hours a day. That's all. And if you do that every day, you can produce a 500-page book. It's the consistency, but you typically wouldn't write for 8 hours a day. I teach for 9 hours a day. I'm over here for about 9 hours every day. But you couldn't write that long. It's because of the nature of it, and there's so much mental intensity. So there would be a lot of what looks like downtime for a writer. I admire the writers like Chaucer, who had a full-time job. Milton had a job, a full-time job. Some of these great writers, Shakespeare, owned a company. They weren't just writers. They were managers. They were businessmen. They were diplomats. Dante, he was a politician for a while. So I admire writers who do things in addition to writing. If I'm ever going to be a writer, that's how it's going to have to get done until I retire. I guess I could write. So what is Leaves of Grass? And there's only 1 or 2 more, so we're almost done. It's a controversial collection of poets considered obscene by some for what was thought to be overt sexuality. There's always been this, I don't know how certain scholars are. I've never really done any research into him myself, just what I've learned in classes. But many people think he was homosexual. But they say he never, would never act on it. That's the explanation. So when you read him, although nothing that we read would you see any of that, but if you read some of his longer poetry, a lot of his poetry is long, you'll see evidence of that. You'll see, oh, that's interesting. So anyway, I just thought I'd tell you, and that some of that worked its way into his poetry, as I said, and that's why some people thought it was, too sexual. I don't remember anything in the poetry I've written that was overtly, particularly compared to what we put up with, in our culture. His plan was to write an American epic for the common person. I'd say that's the closest thing to epic poetry we have in America is Whitman. He doesn't write stories, though. Epic stories are always Song of Roland, Beowulf, Dante. They tell a story. The Aeneid. His poems don't really tell a story. They describe a big scene. They describe the country. It's more of a mental story and description. But he does have characteristics of epic poetry. So he published it 7 times between 1855 and 1892, almost 30 years. 7 editions came out, growing and growing. I've seen a copy of. I think I even have one. I bought one time. Wish I knew where all this stuff was, but it was a very thin. And then you look at the biggest. Like I said, it's very large, so it grew and grew over the years. He did write a novel, a temperance novel. Do you have any idea what a temperance novel would be about? That was a thing back in the 1870s, 80s, 90s. Temperance was the term used for anti-alcohol groups. Back in those days, I guess we had a huge problem with alcoholism in America, and particularly women were the head of a lot of these organizations in America called temperance organizations or clubs or groups, and they would advocate for prohibition and things like that. We tried it; it didn't work. But I've heard other people say it actually did work. It actually was. It prevented many of the problems that the alcoholism created. Just one little note about alcoholism. It's interesting that, and maybe it makes a lot of sense, but the country of Russia has always had a history of that. Now, if you think about it, it's one of the coldest places on earth. So, you know, alcohol, I guess, warms you up. But there's a lot of staying inside a lot of the year. I think we've had that issue with the COVID. We've had lots, you know, the rates of alcoholism and drug use have gone up. So if you don't have anything better to do, those are two easy escape routes. And so during American history, we tried it. We tried to prohibit it, and that's the government getting involved. Always, it never really works out. Even though there were benefits to prohibition, it was probably a violation of a lot of constitutional rights. People have the right to make bad decisions. And so, anyway, that's what the temperance movement was. He did write another collection called Drum Beats. You might see that, but he included it in the newest editions of Leaves of Grass. I don't know if he ever published it separately, but it's really now a part of Leaves of Grass. Yeah.
Are you for legalizing marijuana?
I'm not. You could probably make a case for it that I couldn't argue with, you know, legally and constitutionally. I'm not for it, but I think it'd be hard. It's probably hard to justify that legally. Yeah. Why? Well, what about you?
I'm neutral.
I mean, when you just give people things that are dangerous, not maybe marijuana, but what it leads to. I've always called it a gateway drug. But you realize people have the right to make bad decisions, and it's really the job of the church to minister to people and encourage them, rather than the country. I draw the line in abortion. That's you know, that kills people, and I'll advocate for prohibiting that. But it's still. I heard one guy say one time, we hope to have a country where nobody would even think of abortion. I mean, it wouldn't even be on people because it's not in their heart. Nobody would want to do that. That's the kind of country we want to have, not just the government saying, don't do this. All right. I think there's one more slide. So this is it. Transcendentalism is a part. We defined it with Thoreau and Emerson. So we're going to have to bring that back out again. I'm not sure. I'll find out if you understood it from your test. But he incorporates, I should have added Romanticism, Transcendentalism, because this is really a part of Romanticism, but realism is the opposite of Romanticism. So it's kind of hard to pigeonhole him. He has a lot of both. He's the father of free verse. Anybody know what free verse is?
Free verse?
Yeah. It's free verse. It's free poetry. That, of course, it doesn't mean financial.
Maybe it doesn't have to rhyme, I guess?
That's half of the answer. The other thing it doesn't have to have is, anybody have any idea?
Tempo? Like it's no
That's
rhyme.
exactly right. It's rhythm or meter.
Yeah.
Now, all poetry has rhythm. The language has rhythm. So that would be incorrect for me to say it has no rhythm. It has no meter. Meter is the same rhythm over and over and over. And he was the father. He popularized free verse. No rhyme. Very good, Tucker. No rhyme and no meter. Also, he used catalogs, which, remember from 9th grade, epic poets use it. It lists people, and it gives the effect of vastness, V-A-S-T, vastness. So when you have long lists of things, you don't just say there are a lot of things, you list them, and you say, wow, this is a lot of things. It's experimental. He doesn't, really worry about the conventional rules. the language is simple, but the ideas are complex. So you don't have to go get a dictionary to look up the words he uses. Still, he manages to discuss complex ideas. He's egotistical, but not in the selfish kind of way that you usually think of it. I mean, that's the definition of selfish, right? Egotistical, it's all about you, selfish. But selfish is never considered a virtue. He focuses inward because it's his best way to describe to us what we're like. Because he says he's just like you and me. So he talks about himself. He celebrates America, democracy, and the common man. So that makes him both realistic and romantic. And he's a Civil War poet. We're going to read the poem next week, Monday or Wednesday. Oh, Captain, my Captain. Have you ever heard of it? It's about the death of Abraham Lincoln. When lilacs last in the dooryard bloom, a much longer poem also about the death of Lincoln. So Lincoln was a great symbol for him. And when he died, he was considered a great poet. Emily Dickinson, when we study her later, she was unknown. Whitman was very well known. And I think that was the last one. I've tried to reread Song myself, and I guess I could give you portions of it. That's probably the best way to do it. These poems are too long for us to study, some of them. I've given the poems we're going to read, I think there are 5 of them. They're all very short and doable. I just need to figure out maybe one other to give you a broader picture of what he's about. And yeah, so we're not going to do her yet. So if you would, I'm going to give you a packet of poems. There's just 4 or 5 here. I want you to keep them. We're not going to do them all today. So I need you to hang on to these for next week. Lillian's not here. Everybody else is after. We have about 20 minutes. Quickly. All right, so we're going to start at the beginning here. There are questions. What we'll do, guys, what we're going to do is I like for us to do one together and for you to do one alone. So it gets you into practice. You'll see what we're working with. So we're going to start with I Hear America Singing. There are 5 questions at the bottom. We'll just talk through this and see. We will do Learned Astronomer on your own. So let me read this to you. First of all, if you look at it, I think it looks like more like prose than poetry. Look how long the lines are. This isn't what your typical poems look like, not Keats and Wordsworth and all of them. This looks different, and it sounds different. There's no rhyme and there's no meter. So let me read it to you. I hear America singing. I hear America singing the very carols I hear, those of mechanics, each one singing as it should be, blithe and strong. The carpenter singing as he measures his plank or beam. The mason singing his as he makes ready for work or leaves off work. The boatman singing what belongs to him in his boat. The deckhand singing on the steamboat deck. The shoemaker singing as he sits on his bench. The hatter singing as he stands. the woodcutter's song, the plowboy's on his way to the morning or at afternoon intermission or at sunset, the delicious singing of the mother, or of the young wife at work, or of the girl sewing and washing, each singing what belongs to him or her and none else. The day what belongs to the day, the night, at night the party of young fellows, robust, friendly, singing with open mouths, their strong, melodious song. I'm going to ask you to reread it and just mark anything that you see that that you think is important. So reread it and see what you can see, and then we'll do it together. All right, so we're gonna go through the questions. There's certain things that you already know about in analyzing poetry, and that's when, where, how, why, and what. Who's the speaker? What's he doing? What's the setting? What's the circumstance? Those aren't questions here, but I want to ask you, who does the speaker appear to be? Tell me about the speaker. Jeff, what do you know about the speaker?
Well, he's talking about people on a steamboat, carpenter. He's just kind of like observing what people do.
Right, that's a good start. He's an observer. He doesn't seem to participate in anything, he just observed. What is he observing? What do all the details in the poem, how do they relate to each other? What is he observing them doing? Yes.
Basically just going on with their everyday life.
Yes, and what primary aspect of everyday life does he focus on?
Work.
Work. So this is a poem about work. Well, that's odd because the title of the poem, I Hear America Singing. You'd think he would say, I see America working. So we probably need to answer that. He does describe them as singing. Be frank with you, I've never heard anybody sing at work unless it's maybe the choir. That's a job, they're singing. I mean, Ms. Twig, so wonder why he focuses on their singing, something that most of us don't associate with work.
I guess just because America sort of has like a working class pride kind of to it, I guess.
Did you say pride?
Yeah.
Okay. Then why are they singing? That's a really good point. And why do you say working class?
Like people that, get everything done, that are, running the steamboat and are cutting the wood and all this.
So-
Making America
Making-
run.
Right.
Making sure.
Yeah. But wonder why he focuses on that. Now, what kind of work would you describe, working class? How would you describe the work that's done in this poem? Better way to look at it, what work is not described in this poem? What kind of jobs?
Office jobs.
Office jobs,
It's all
Administrative
labor.
work.
administrative work. I don't see any politicians, I don't see any generals. I don't see any doctors or lawyers. What do we call those kinds of jobs? But there's a name we use.
White collar.
White collar.
Black collar.
Yeah, versus blue collar. is typically what you consider. So this is a song, this is a poem about what we call blue collar jobs. Again, just want to make sure we understand, what is that kind of job, Jackson? What's a blue collar job? What do all these jobs have in common? I heard a couple of answers.
It's like handwork.
Did you say handwork?
Yeah, that's not really good.
No, I think that's,
Yeah, that's not
they
good.
work with their hands.
It's like labor.
It's,
Yeah.
it's laboring type job, but skilled labor.
Yeah.
Not that that's unskilled, yes.
It's the basic stuff that just keeps America running.
Now, why do you say that it keeps America working? It's basic. Why do you call it basic?
Well, I say basic because it's at least the minimum that is needed to have a working society. Like, you need somebody to repair the clothes and they repair the clothes, wash the clothes, cut wood, repair shoes, run the steamboats for transportation. You need the people to run the base functions, and that's what these people are doing.
I know you're not saying we don't need lawyers, doctors,
Yeah.
policemen, generals, but again, I think that was a good word, basic. These are the basic needs people have: what they wear, what they eat, how they travel, where they live. You know, these people work with those kind of basic things, and that's what the poem is about. Now, why are they singing? Are they singing? Are they literally singing, or is it some figurative singing that's going on? He says, he literally says, I hear the mechanic singing, the carpenter. I've never heard a carpenter sing. I've never heard a mason sing.
It's figurative.
All right. Then about what? What's the figurative meaning of singing if it's not literally singing?
Being happy.
They're happy.
Yeah, I was gonna say like maybe joy or satisfaction, maybe?
All right. All right, ladies, these people enjoy their work. Have you ever heard anybody, I've heard the blues, you know, the blues is a kind of music, supposedly sad music. With that exception of requiem at a funeral, I don't associate singing or dancing. We talked about that with Wordsworth, you know, about the daffodils dancing in the breeze. I don't associate singing or dancing with sadness. So it's a perfect metaphor. If you want to write that word down so you have the terminology. The singing is a metaphor for, as Tucker said, as Walker said, being happy at their work. And who does that remind you of? Somebody who looked at people working and saw that most of them were not happy. Thoreau said that. He said that he doesn't see happiness in work. He sees penance, like people were not happy. I think we talked about, if you see a person who's not happy at his job, you can tell. Or if you see somebody happy at his job, you can tell. It comes through pretty clearly. All right, so we've gotten that part. That's what the poem is about. Do this. It's kind of a little bit late, but I still think worth it. Remember I said he liked to make lists? Well, this is a list. This is a catalog. I want you to go with a highlighter or a pencil and circle every job that's mentioned here. Yeah, just circle it or highlight it. Anybody count them? How many jobs did he mention? I counted 11 if you include the mother as a job, and also the sewing or washing. That's maybe 2 jobs, but somewhere around 11 or 12. I don't think there's anything significant about that number, maybe, but it is an example of his catalog. What's the one job that you don't associate with work? At least one that's listed. It's not really a job, but he includes it.
The mother one.
Yeah, granted, that's,
Sorry.
but it says the young wife at work, whatever that is,
Party.
the partying at the end.
Oh.
He says the day what belongs to the day, the night a young party of robust. So, wonder why he includes that. If the poem is about working, why does he include the guys at the party at the end of the day?
He's talking about how, while some people are partying, other people are actually doing their work.
Well, these are people that party at night, not daytime. It says
Yeah.
the day belongs to the day, and at night, the party of young fellows, robust and friendly.
Well,
Wonder why he includes that.
while they're working during the day, they relax and celebrate at the night.
And so what is he saying about a day's work? How does that fit into this picture of people happy at their work?
Because they have something to look forward to.
Yeah.
And it's rewarding.
It's-
Rewarding. It's
Okay.
like- It's like dessert.
They have
It's
something
like
to look
dessert.
forward to. I would say a little bit different than that is, I enjoy my evenings better when I've worked hard during the day. In other
Yeah,
words, if
yeah.
I didn't have the work during the day, I don't think I would be as enjoying of the time off.
True.
And it's not that although we do, as Jackson said, we look forward to it, but I enjoy the work too. And I enjoy the time off from work. I think that's the perfect balance, that if you can enjoy both. It makes the time off even more enjoyable if you've had a good day's work and you're not just dreading it and it's a burden. One other expression is number 2. It says, each one singing what is his. The carpenter singing his, the mason singing his, the boatman singing what belongs to him. And at the end, the day, what belongs to the day, or each singing what belongs to him. What belongs to each worker? Why does he put it that way, Jeff?
There, he said, at the first line, he said, I hear America singing kind of fairy carols I hear, so I'm assuming each worker is like singing their own carol, I guess.
In what way does each worker have a different carol? You're right, it's not all the same carol. Yes.
They're all just doing like their own job.
Hey, guys, just, yeah.
Isn't that they're all just doing their own job and on the same thing?
All right, so what is one of the things the author, welcome, glad to have you back. Say that again.
They're all just doing their own job and not the same thing.
So what is he saying about American work? What is he celebrating? Not only is he celebrating the work, yeah.
The workers own their own tools.
Oh, yeah, how do you own? Have you ever heard that expression? I like to use it when it comes to education. You need to own your education. What do we mean when we say that? You've probably been told that. You need to own something. What does that actually mean? That's what they're saying here. These people own it. So if they own their work, what does that mean?
When you own something, you take good care of it most of the time.
Exactly. You care about it if you own it. It's different than it belongs to somebody else. And
But not to mix
I want to compliment Tucker. I know many of you may have work that you do, but I've noticed Tucker's had a lot to say because I think he understands work. I know you have a job and it's a pretty important job. So I think, and you also work with people who do the work. You work with the guys who put the roofs on and everything. I think, you can hear kind of an ownership coming out of that. Here's a guy who knows of what he speaks. He knows and all of you've worked before, but he's kind of got not a full-time job, but a pretty consistent job. So I think that's interesting. One last question about this. You see what we've done with this poem? It's about 12 lines. Look how much there is to say about the poem. And we haven't exhausted it, but I do want to ask one more question. Why does he call them carols? the very carols. What does the word carol add to the meaning of the poem? Now, wait a minute, here at Christmas, it's the only time of the whole year that we associate the word carol. This is not a Christmas poem, but he calls them carols. So, what do you know about carol? I don't know the definition of it, I should have looked it up.
Sung during holidays and stuff, and they're, actually, it doesn't have to be holidays, but
Well, but-
that's where I know them from.
But I think it does have to be high. Have you ever heard a carol sung any other time of year? A Halloween
Not
carol,
really.
a Fourth of
Usually
July
just-
carol?
Usually just Christmas.
It's just Christmas. Now, I still don't know what the word means, but what then do you associate carols with? It's not just, what is
Happy.
They are joyful songs. So if he had called them anything else, I think it would have been misleading. Well, one last thing about the poem, can I mention just two things maybe? One is, it does, and we said it, but write it down. You missed all this. I don't know where you're gonna get this, okay? Because you'll have to look at the video. But this is a poem that celebrates diversity, and that's the difference is. What's the similarity? What makes them unified? Tell me all the things that make all these people unified.
They own their own tools and they don't have like bosses.
They take ownership for what they're doing.
They're all happy.
They're all joyful, happy. They all work with their hands. You left out one pretty big thing.
They're all American.
Exactly.
Americans.
Guys, I don't know what you think about some of the things that are going on in America, but my son told this great story, and I'm not advocating this. I wear masks everywhere, but he was in someplace like Walmart, and he saw this guy walking around, young guy, pretty big, tough looking guy, nice guy, I guess, but he was the only person in the store without a mask. And he said he was walking around acting like he owned the place. You know what that looks like? Not slinking, not, are you looking at me, you worried about me? And again, I'm not advocating, I wear masks everywhere, I think being a good citizen. But you know what he had on his back of his shirt?
Don't try.
Says, "You are an American. Start acting like one." And again, I don't advocate just not wearing, I think it's a safe thing to do. But I love that attitude that we're Americans. Let's not forget what that means. And I think this is a poem that celebrates America. So well done. You have some reading to do. We'll do some more of this Monday.